I had intended to already have done a live stream on the Entertainment Guy. I've had all the videos on here done for today and moved on to just relaxing and getting ready for tomorrow. But got backed up today, so here we are. I want to discuss the draft. I've been wanting to discuss the draft for a while, and I'm going to get into doing profiles on a lot of these players before we get into the draft. But the draft's not until when? October? Maybe? Like, we don't know when the draft is, so I don't see, again, and I put it in the same category as the previews, where if I do series previews, sure, I mean, a lot of people are going to click on that, hey, let's do our predictions, but it's too far out. So the draft, it still feels like it's too far out. I can't really do like a legit video on where I think people are going to get drafted until we've done the draft lottery. Now, what I've got on the board here is the 7 picks by most likely how they're going to get pulled. And yes, if you're a Detroit fan, you have a chance of ending up being 4th on this list rather than 1st. But I'm saying, you know what? Let's just pretend Detroit gets the 1st pick and Ottawa gets 2nd and 3rd, and then everybody falls in line as they should. Let's just do that. So, 3 different prospect rankings I have up here show just how widely diverse of this group really is. Like, you can't find any kind of consensus outside of one. So Hockey Prospect, Elite Prospects, and the International Scouting Service all say Lafreniere at number 1. Yes. At number 2, Hockey Prospect and Elite Prospects still show Quinton Byfield at number 2. Now, the interesting part of that is that he's been moving around just a little bit. So on the ISS, Byfield is at 4th. Now, Byfield's a center, so the idea of a center dropping, I have my doubts. Very often when you're at the draft, the guy who's going to be a surprise with being taken earlier than you might expect will be a center. So I don't think Byfield necessarily drops to 4th. They have Stützle at 2nd on ISS. Now, at number 3, Hockey Prospect has Stützle, Elite Prospects has Rossi, and ISS has Drysdale. Drysdale, of course, being a defenseman who's available all the way down here on Hockey Prospect. Now at 4, Cole Perfetti at the center for Hockey Prospect. Lucas Raymond here. And Lucas Raymond is 5th on this list behind Byfield. Whereas on Hockey Prospect, they have Askarov at 5, which is the highest of any of the 3 up here. Drysdale's at 5 for Elite Prospects, and Perfetti is number 5. No, Raymond is number 5 on ISS. Number 6 is Perfetti on that list. Lucas Raymond, number 6 for Hockey Prospect. Holtz is number 6 here. So you can see there's not really any kind of consensus. And all of the opinions on the draft picks are completely different. This is why I haven't been doing like okay, well, here's who I think is going to get drafted where. In order to do that without knowing which teams are going to be drafting which picks, you have to have an idea of which are the better players. And in some drafts, that's really obvious, where you have your top tier, and then you have your middle tier, and then you have everybody else. And in this draft, it feels like your top 3 are your top tier. So Lafreniere, Byfield, and Stützle, in my eyes, are the top 3. And then after that, you have jockeying. But again, it is not something there's consensus on. Byfield's number 2 on this list and that list. He's 4 here. Stützle is all the way down here on Elite Prospects. So again, it all depends on who you ask and what scouts are looking for. Now, if teams are drafting in these spots, at the number 1 overall draft pick going to Detroit, I really honestly think if Detroit gets the number 1 pick, they have to take Lafreniere. It doesn't mean that's who Stevie Yzerman's going to take. The rumor's been he wants Stützle. The interesting thing is that depending on the buzz at the draft table, he might be able to move down from number 1 and still get Stützle at, say, 3. So depending on who drafts at 3, Detroit might look to trade down. Might be like, you know what? Lafreniere is going to be a great player. We think Stützle will too. And we can add something else in the process. Do I think they trade out of number 1 overall? I think that could be crazy, but it's Steve Yzerman. Anything's possible. So this is where it gets interesting, because then Ottawa can kind of sort of remake themselves. At 2, I think you go with Byfield. Byfield's a big center. He's the kind of player that they need. Just imagine Byfield on a line with Brady Tkachuk. That would be a pretty amazing just duo right there. And just what that would give the Ottawa Senators down the middle. And then at drafting at 3, understanding Stützle is still on the board, I think you take a risk, and I think at 3 you take Drysdale. The reason being, if you add Jamie Drysdale and you're the Ottawa Senators, you might be putting together one of the better top 4s in the NHL when it comes to the blue line, especially if Brandstrom does work out. And Brandstrom, it's still far too early to put the bust word on Brandstrom. And I saw one post on Twitter from a reporter. Was it the Ottawa Sun who said, "Oh, imagine trading Stone to Vegas for an AHL level defenseman." I was like, really? Because we don't know what Brandstrom is yet. So yes, he could end up being a bust, sure, but he's not. So not sure why you're trolling the fan base of the team you're covering. But I think Drysdale would be a good addition for the Ottawa Senators. That being said, again, if you're Pierre Dorion and you're saying, all right, we want Drysdale, you might get a phone call from the Kings that say, we really like Stützle at 3. Are you sure you're not going to take Stützle? Maybe you see a move. Maybe you don't. Maybe the LA Kings say, you know what? We can take a risk that we'll get Stützle at 4. So I'm going to say right now that if Stützle ends up dropping to 4th, so if that happens and we see Lafreniere, Byfield, Drysdale, Stützle is the kind of pick that we look back on years and years later and say, how did he end up dropping to 4? I am looking at Jaromir Jagr. I am looking at a Matthew Tkachuk as an example of guys who end up being drafted in a position which looks fine at the time, and then later on you say, how did that happen? How did they get drafted there? How is that possible? There's going to be a video done, or maybe a series of videos on the draft and where guys get drafted and where they probably should have been drafted. But Stützle at 4, if the Kings pick him up, he does project to play right away. I would say all 4 of these players should push for a roster spot in the fall. Drysdale as a defenseman, you never know. Bowen Byram showed that just being a premier defensive prospect doesn't necessarily mean you get a job right out of camp. But Bowen Byram hasn't lost any market value or any stock value at this stage of the game, and I think Colorado's really, really looking good with Makar and Byram. So if you're going to say, the Avs will never win a cup, I would beg to differ with that. So at 5, this is where it gets really, really wide open. So I look more at the position these guys play. So you've got Rossi here, here, and here, right? Perfetti here, Perfetti down here, below Rossi, Perfetti here, above Rossi, but only by 1 spot. And then you've got Raymond, who's kind of consistently excellent. He's a winger. I'll say, if you're Anaheim, you're looking at a center, and I'll say Rossi going to Anaheim because I think the centers will normally bump the wingers down. Again, whether that's right or wrong, we can have that debate at another time. We can look at drafts and say, is that where teams mess up, where they draft the center rather than the winger? Sometimes I think that's the case, where you're looking, especially if you're looking for a big center and you're like, well, he doesn't necessarily have all the offense, but we can teach that, and he's a big physical center. And then years down the road, you go, what was that pick about? Now, the next spot going to New Jersey, and keeping in mind almost everybody is a forward. The only other defenseman that gets in is Sanderson, who's 12th on this list. Sanderson's 11th on this list. So I can't see Sanderson being taken by the Devils, even though they could probably use a blue liner. I can't see Askarov being taken because they're going to look and say, you know what, we got Blackwood for years to come, and we feel good about our goaltending going forward. So I can't see them making that decision. This is where I think Perfetti gets taken then by the New Jersey Devils, and that could end up being a steal. So then, what ends up going to Buffalo? The perfect pick for Buffalo may very well be the guy who at this point would be kind of sort of dropping, and that's Raymond out of Sweden. And think about it. He's a winger, can play the left side or the right, and you've got Eichel down the middle. You've got Reinhart, should be a center. I know he's played wing, but he should be a center. At center, you're good. It's your wings where you probably need another guy, and Lucas Raymond could be the guy. That could absolutely be the guy. So the interesting thing is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I take Rossi that's not in the top 7 with Hockey Prospect, and for me, Askarov does not end up taking it. Askarov is number 10 on Elite Prospects. He's not in the top 12 for the International Scouting Service. So the goaltender ends up dropping past the top 7, which I think makes sense. I think with Askarov, I think it would probably be a number 10, maybe a number 11 pick. And we won't know until after the first round of the playoffs who's going to end up picking where. So this is part of the reason why it's hard for me to do like a full-on simulation of the draft. And here's what I think the first round's going to look like. Because let's just say Montreal gets this pick. Maybe they don't go with Byfield. Maybe they're more likely to go with Drysdale. Maybe Montreal says, you know what? We can trade the pick and pick up something else. Maybe instead of being at 4, maybe the Kings are at 6. Maybe at 4, maybe you have Pittsburgh. Maybe Pittsburgh lucks out. Well, they wouldn't be 4. Pittsburgh lucks out, gets a top 3 pick. That could completely set it all on its ear. Pittsburgh, I would think if they were at 3, they would draft a forward. And so until we're done, I'll say the first round of once that play-in is done, we'll have a much better idea of who's drafting where. And then we can really get into the meat and potatoes of a potential draft and figuring out who's going to get taken where. That's my top 7 if we had the draft just with the order of finish. And so that would mean that the San Jose Sharks, in order to acquire Erik Karlsson, the last piece would be Jamie Drysdale. And I don't think if you're San Jose, I don't think there's a good answer. I don't think there's a player that can get picked at 3 this year. If they went with Stützle and Byfield, I don't think you feel any better with that. I think you actually might feel kind of sort of worse. Because either way, there's a prospect going to Ottawa that San Jose really desperately needs themselves. Considering the season they had, if they could have come out of it with a top 3 draft pick, that would have been a nice consolation prize. And then maybe we're talking about a prospect coming into their lineup like a Drysdale, like a Stützle, that could have helped turn things around as quickly as next year. But that's not the case. Let me know what you guys think. So of the names that are on the board, who do you think is going to end up being a steal? And who do you think is overrated? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always, where you think guys are going to go. And again, this is just the top 7, because that's really all I can do right now is just if the top 7 stayed the way they are, where do I think they'd go? Thank you guys so much for watching. Do hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through you just happened upon this video. I will talk to you again soon.